A husband goes missing during his nightly run, and what's left behind isn't just blood. It's a butcher's signature. Tonight, a killer with a taste for health is preparing his next course, and someone is on the menu.
There's a chill in the air. Must be fall. Join me for a tale of Halloween. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Join me for a tale of Halloween. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It is indeed Wednesday, but in October, every day, there's something fun and scary at Weekly Spooky. I'm your host and narrator, Enrique Couto, and we have a very, very special treat for you here tonight. A novella of questionable taste about cannibalism, written by David O'Hanlon. And tomorrow we head out on the blood hunt in Strickfield with a story by Rob Fields. And make sure you're subscribed because this Friday we'll be cutting deep into horror as we talk about Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, my personal favorite horror film. So subscribe on your podcasting app of choice, and while you're at it, leave us a 5-star rating and help other spookies like yourself know they're in the right place. And if you want to support us in a very direct way, just head to weeklyspooky.com/join. For as little as $1 a month, you get 2 bonus episodes every month, 5 years of exclusive creepypasta readings and audiobooks, and so much more. That's at weeklyspooky.com/join. And remember, when October ends, we don't go anywhere. We'll have plenty of terrifying tales to help you celebrate all of the holidays and beyond. But now, as for tonight, what if you found out the killer stalking your town wasn't driven by rage or revenge, but by appetite? What if every runner, every bodybuilder, every laborer was just another cut of meat in his eyes? Tonight, my spookies, we're serving up a story about what happens when the modern world collides with something ancient, something hungry. So grab yourself a snack, and we'll get to that right after this. Modern Tastes by David O'Hanlon. Prologue. You gotta be hungry. Les Brown. It was the second week of October, which meant it was 78 degrees, following snow 2 days prior. The further you got into the year, the more of a bipolar bitch Mother Nature became in Arkansas. Joel Francheret wasn't about to let the good weather go to waste. His afternoon runs were his reward for 8 hours sitting behind a desk at the Alex Murphy Technical Institute. He always started with a lap around the paved path that encircled the campus to warm up his legs. AMTI understood the toll office work could take on the body, and the track was just one of the ways they offered to get their employees up and moving. When Joel had made the decision to do something about his weight, he could barely walk around it once without getting winded. That fact made him smile now. After his warm-up, he took the rugged 1-mile trail through the woods to Katy Park, where he ran around the duck pond before heading back. he decided to take an extra lap since he'd cut one earlier in the week on account of the snow. At 6:45, he was completely spent and decided to call it a night. Halloween was his wife's favorite holiday, and he wanted to surprise her the next day. He'd taken vacation without telling her. When she got off work tomorrow, he'd have everything out of the garage and the place fully decorated. Everything except the yard, of course. Doing that together had been their tradition since they got their first shitty apartment together back in college. The only thing they had to decorate was a 6-foot stretch of patio back then. But they always made the most of it. He was more of a Christmas guy, but he loved watching Cora's face light up like one of her plastic jack-o'-lanterns every spooky season. The wooded path was soggy from the snowmelt, and the mud squished around his New Balance sneakers, spattering up his bare calves. Looking at the muck clinging to his leg hair made him smile. 2 years before, he hadn't even been able to see his shins. His shoes were a mess, but they were due for replacement anyhow. He'd get a new pair when he took Cora out for the weekend. He glanced down at his feet once more, feeling extra proud of himself. If he'd been looking up instead, he might have noticed the figure crouching in the trees overhead. Chapter 1. There is no sincerer love than the love of food. George Bernard Shaw. Troy Bannister racked the barbell on the 7th rep with a frustrated groan. He could have gotten 2 or 3 more. He sat up on the bench, debating logging the effort in his app. It was his 3rd shitty set of the session. The 225 had given him a nice pump, but PRs took more than great pecs. They required heart, and his was currently stuck in his throat. He'd told a coworker he liked her via text the night before. He wasn't sure which part of that had been stupider. Talita had read it, but never responded. He'd seen the little bubbles pop up as she typed a response that never came through. That couldn't possibly be good. They worked together 3 nights a week at Brown's supermarket, and he should have timed his revelation during that window. Instead, Troy decided to speak up on his day off. Now he was stuck with the stomach-curdling unease while he waited for her to text him a rejection. What if she doesn't text me anything? He thought. Wouldn't that be way worse? Walking into the store tomorrow without a clue what to expect? Troy glanced at the mirror. He might have been an unlovable loser, but he had to admit that his triceps looked great. He flexed and tried to think about the progress he'd made. He'd taken up weightlifting 4 years ago, when his last relationship fell apart. He'd never been out of shape, more like he just didn't have one. He always wanted to look like a comic book hero, but had never attained a build greater than the stick figure drawings he used to doodle in his school books. Talita was the first woman he'd taken an interest in since he found out the truth about Ashley. He should have kept his streak going. Between the stress and the pre-workout, Troy wasn't sure he could do another heavy set without vomiting. If he'd embarrassed himself with Talita, he could always find another job. Finding another gym was out of the question. They had a pullover machine, after all. That was rarer than true love. He wiped down the bench, taking a mental inventory of all the exercises he knew. He knew how to grow everything, except his balls, or else he would have told Talita how he felt in person, instead of via text. In another year or 2, he wouldn't have that problem. He was in great shape, but he wasn't in the kind of shape where people ignore your shortcomings. Yet. If his chest was a little wider, his abs a little thicker, and his arms a bit more vascular, then he'd have no problem saying things like, "I really like you," without feeling stupid. Because you can be stupid when you have the body to make up for it. Troy went to the dumbbell rack and ripped a 45 to his shoulder. Overhead extensions always made him feel better. Every gym rat knew the exercise was the pump-inducing penicillin to cure every ailment. He banged out a fast set of 12 with his body angled to the mirror so he could watch the lateral head flex with each repetition. He let the weight sit on his shoulder while he took a short rest. The overhead extension isn't about lifting the weight. It's about lifting your goddamn spirits. He took deep breaths to bring his heart rate down a little. He hated resting, but it was a necessary part of the process. He looked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the front of the gym. The bank of treadmills was lined up parallel to them, so the runners could look at the outside world that they could have ran in for free. Troy didn't understand the idea of running inside, or running in general, but there were worse things to block the windows with. Between two jiggling asses, Troy watched a woman hanging a poster on one of the light poles. She was too far away to be certain, but she looked upset. She showed one of the posters to a passerby, who shook his head, and she seemed to deflate a little more. Must have lost her dog, he told himself, as he pressed the dumbbell overhead. She's way too pretty to be a cat lady. Cora Francheret wanted to throw the flyers, maybe dump them from an airplane or off the overpass. People actually cared about littering, but not so much about missing husbands. It had only been one night, so the police weren't exactly all ears to begin with. Then they asked for a photo of Joel and busted the whole case wide open. Joel had lost so much weight since they both went on the Mediterranean diet and he started running. Cora had given them a picture from their recent trip to the Gulf shores. Joel's old high school musculature was showing despite some stubborn near 40 fat that hadn't come off yet. They looked over the picture carefully before turning their attention to the disheveled housewife in the oversized tee and leggings that had provided it to them. Cora wished she had picked a photo without her in it as well. Joel looked like a more mature version of his younger self. She looked frumpy. She was sure the detectives were noticing the modest one-piece she'd picked to hide the bra fat or the sarong to cover her hip dips. Maybe they were noticing the migratory pattern of her tits heading south for the winter of her life. She definitely wished she'd given them a different photo. The detectives were careful not to say it outright, but the implication was plain in the way they told her not to worry. "He'll be home soon," was cop talk, for he'd ran off with someone hotter than Cora. She knew that wasn't Joel. The man ate the same lunch every day, watched Guardians of the Galaxy at least once a month, and hadn't updated his musical tastes since 2002. If he liked something, that was the only thing he wanted. He liked Cora since they were 14. But binging true crime shows had taught her it doesn't matter what you know. It only matters what you can prove. Cora became suddenly self-aware of the way the shirt had found its way into the folds of her belly. She knew Joel wouldn't cheat, let alone run away with some other woman. The evidence said, why the fuck not? Cora compartmentalized it all the best she could. What she believed about herself went in one tidy, snap-tight storage container. What she knew about Joel went in another. There was no way he just ran off. She was sure something had happened to him. She went to AMTI straight from the police station and found his Hyundai parked in its usual spot. His work clothes were folded neatly in the passenger seat. He'd clearly gone for his after-work run and was still wearing those items. That was proof enough. You don't put on nylon shorts and a faded Warped Tour cutoff to meet some bimbo. He always wore his fat people shirts when he ran. He said feeling how loose they fit helped him keep motivated when his legs were burning and he wanted to quit. Maybe that was why he grabbed one of the XXLs from his side of the closet that morning. Self-doubt and the opinions of the police might have hurt, but there were still miles to go. She sniffed the shirt, thinking about the last time he'd worn it. He'd finished his laps in record time. He was so excited as he peeled it away for his shower. Cora had watched the sweat falling from his chest hair and trailing down to the edge of his shorts. He'd noticed her watching. He told her how much he had missed giving her a reason to look at him that way, and they'd made love for hours. She was drifting further from her college peak, but Joel had never minded. He reassured her daily that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Fuck, it's true," she pouted as she cut through the woods. "He's been lying to me about being beautiful for years. If he can do that, he can cheat. That bastard." Cora balled the hem of the shirt in her fists and shook her head, trying to clear away the negativity. Maybe Joel wasn't a liar. Maybe he was just stupid and didn't realize she was hideous. That would explain why he thought she was hot and why he wouldn't leave her. Her poor, idiotic husband was out there somewhere, and she needed to rescue him. She hugged herself, feeling the material of his shirt and wishing he was inside it. She couldn't quit looking for him. Cora went to the pond and sat down on the bank, picturing Joel running his laps the night before. There wasn't much crime in the city. The parks were safe even after dark. She thought about the documentaries and true crime shows, looking for any scenario that might explain his disappearance. Nothing added up. There were no gangs in town. There hadn't been any indications of a serial killer. He didn't fit the profile to be sex trafficked, though they'd be missing out, in Cora's opinion. He was in good health, but there were much younger and easier to catch options to harvest organs from. He clearly wouldn't have been worth robbing in his running attire. She'd followed his path exactly, so he couldn't have simply fallen or had an accident. No scenario fit the situation. She eyed the parking lot across the way, wondering again if it were possible he ran away with someone else. Someone could have been waiting with extra clothes for their getaway. A skinny homewrecker with big, perky tips and a dump truck ass to keep her from tipping over. She's probably tall, too. Cora hated this imaginary bitch. One of the ducks floated along, lazily, snatching up soggy pieces of bread, drifting on the surface. Cora held up the flyer. "Have you seen Daffy?" she sniffed. The duck didn't respond, so at least she hadn't gone completely crazy. A piece of trash drifted into the animal's path, and it quickly paddled around it. Cora groaned, Most people didn't give a shit about litter, either. She grabbed a rock to pin the flyers down and went to the edge. There were a pair of crossed branches laying on the ground, discarded lightsabers or swords from a kid's game, she assumed. As the litter drifted closer, Cora could see it was a shoe. She used one of the branches to swat it closer to her. Gravel and mud caked the sole, but the worn outer edge reminded her of Joel. He always turned his feet out when he walked, leaving the same angle on all his footwear. She swung the branch again, splashing water into her face. The sneaker warbled from the near miss. The logo bobbled into view for the longest second of Cora's life. She hooked the branch on the shoe to pull it in. It was the same brand as Joel's. She was sure of it. It slipped free, and she hurriedly batted it for another pull. The shoe capsized, revealing the stump of the ankle. Cora collapsed into the water. Chapter 2. Man shall not live by bread alone. Matthew 4:4. Emil's protein bar was never crowded. In fact, his partial ownership of the Hot Bod Health Club was the only thing keeping it afloat. That wasn't the case as the police cordoned off Katy Park. Every gym bro and cardio Karen had spilled in from next door, eager to spend the $9 Emil charged for a mediocre protein smoothie made with Best by Yesterday milk or one of his special brownies that were nothing but Betty Crocker box mixes cut with the cheapest chocolate whey concentrate he could buy. For the first time in 7 years, he'd sold out of the nasty confectionaries. Emil went to the cooling rack to see if the next batch was ready to go in the case and beamed with entrepreneurial pride over his latest creation. Each brownie was slathered with cottage cheese frosting he'd found on TikTok and had a face made of candy corn. He set out the handwritten sign, "Put the pump back in pumpkin with the jacked O-lantern brownie." If you didn't know Emil was a marketing genius, all you had to do was ask him. Troy hopped onto his stool at the bar. He was Emil's only regular, so it wasn't like there was ever any argument over who got to sit there. But today, it was the only seat in the house. Emil reached over the counter and slapped him on the delt. "You see that? That's what loyalty gets you in my place, bro," he said. "I saved your spot for you. It about got tooth and nail for a bit, though. I mean, look at this fucking place. Can you believe this, Troy? I'm packed, my guy." "Want your usual?" "Sure," Troy answered half-heartedly. "Don't try too hard to convince me or nothing," Emil said, taking a moment to check his reflection in the baked goods case. "What's up? You shit yourself going for a PR? It happens, bro. Hell, I stripped my drawers twice last week on that goddamn leg press." "I didn't even come close to a PR," Troy answered. "It's Thursday, right?" "Sure is." "Push day, then." Emil thought about it. "You get stuck under the bar? Forget to move the pin to the bottom of the stack? Punch your dick doing push-ups?" "None of the above," Troy sighed. "It's all good, man. Just the usual will be fine." "Bro, you look like a puppy at a Korean barbecue," Emil spoke as he added ingredients to the blender. "You see that baddie by the window? She could play Candy Crush with those nips. I've seen her do it on the stationary bike, too. You're fixin' to down a swole berry smoothie made by my loving hands and with fresh milk, I might fucking add. It's your day off, and tomorrow is pull day, my guy. You should be smiling right now. Maybe you're right. Troy turned his phone over in his hands, resisting the urge to check the text again. Guess I'm thinking too small is all. Thinking? That shit's for nerds that don't lift. Emil's face soured. Oh, fuck, bro. It's a girl, isn't it? Bro, chicks are like high fructose corn syrup. They make everything sweeter, but the whole fucking time, they're making you fat and killing you. It isn't someone from the gym, I hope. Those contracts are binding. I can't let you out of it just because you hit a double bicep like a fucking noob. And now shit's awkward. No, Troy groaned. No one from the gym. Thank God for that. Emil started the blender and leaned over the counter. Troy, what you are experiencing is the pussy paradox, bro. Get your heart broken and you can squat a Honda for reps. Then some new chick comes along and gives you the WYD, and the only thing you're lifting is your goddamn phone to send her TikToks, #us, with a fucking kissy face emoji. I haven't even gotten a text back. Troy set the phone on the counter. And we work together. Shit, that's an easy fix. Roid Rage Oprah assured him. Just quit your job, bro. Troy stared out the window while Emil poured his smoothie and topped it with a sprinkle of Nerds candy for a quick carb reload. Everyone was crowded around the windows, so he could only get glimpses of what was going on. The police had the entire park cordoned off. Several people meandered behind the yellow tape in CSI-branded jackets. There was definitely some heavy shit going on. Troy logged the smoothie into his fitness app and scowled at his calorie total. Thinking about Talita had killed his appetite. He was 60 grams of protein shy for the day already. He needed to focus on what mattered, but his eyes lingered on the text app. Troy glanced back to the park, wondering where he should put in his first job application. A woman was sitting at one of the pavilions, wrapped in a blanket, and talking to a pair of detectives. She was completely drenched, so he couldn't be sure, but she sure looked like the woman that had been passing out flyers earlier. Emil sat the smoothie down next to him. When Troy looked back, someone was blocking his view. He craned his neck to see around them, but it was pointless. Troy sucked at the straw, hoping the woman's dog was all right. The police presence at the park had been hot news for the day. At lunch, everyone had lingered around the job site, trying to get a glimpse of what was going on. Rumor had it the cops had found chopped off hands and feet in the duck pond. You'd think an axe murderer on the loose would mean an early day, but they were already 3 weeks behind schedule on the park expansion, and the foreman wasn't having it. Preston Rich didn't mind the overtime. With winter on the horizon, things would be slowing down for him. Unlike his bowels, he checked his watch and groaned. You gotta be kidding me. He'd been off the clock almost 40 minutes and was still stuck in the damn porta potty. Instead of hitting the usual fast food joints, the crew grabbed their grub from a questionable food truck called Terra Fryer, while they rubbernecked around the police cordon. Preston should have known something was up by how little he spent on the meal. Not every price is paid in cash. That clown must have been buying his cooking oil from AutoZone. The free-range organic chicken Had probably been pigeon meat, too. The next sphincter-scorching fart came with only a sputtering of semi-solid slop, and Preston prayed that meant his guts were empty or had come out entirely. He wasn't particular which one, just as long as this ordeal was over. The tiny overhead vent hadn't been built for a shit like that. Preston swore the odor had become corporeal. He could feel it clinging thickly to the insides of his nostrils and moving down the back of his throat. Preston reached for the toilet paper. He eyed the partial roll of one-ply with growing suspicion. A power washer might be more appropriate. He grimaced at the first wipe. It definitely wouldn't be any more painful. He managed to finish the task with 4 squares left over that he tore off and used to dab the sweat from his forehead. He pulled up his jeans, tightening the belt a notch further than before. That can't be healthy. Preston poked at his stomach. It churned hard in response. No. I'm sorry. Let's just be cool. He stepped out of the porta-potty and looked up at the darkening sky. Halfway to his truck, he spotted the figure lurking around the tailgate. There weren't any other vehicles still on the yard. "Hey!" he shouted. "What are you doing?" The man sprinted away from the truck towards the pyramid of concrete tubes that would connect the existing pond to the new one. Preston watched the man climb up the pipes with a strange, animal-like agility and disappeared inside of one. Whoa, that was actually pretty cool. Preston had seen homeless folks panhandling around the park and wasn't about to roust someone looking for a place to sleep. "Hey, are you okay? I wasn't trying to scare you or anything." Preston took out his phone and turned on the flashlight. He made his way to the culvert pipes, shining the light around to make sure he didn't trip over anything. Tracks in the mud slowed his progress. They were shallow and barefooted. Preston felt even worse for startling him. He dug into his pocket for his lunch change, pulling out a 10 and assorted coins. "Hey man, come on out," Preston said. "You're gonna get tetanus running around barefoot like that. It's cool if you want to sleep here, but I want you to take this money and get you some shoes in the morning." No one came out. "Pal, you still up there?" Preston looked around the side of the pyramid, thinking the homeless man might have crawled out the other side and ran off. "Tell you what, I'm going to put the money down right here. Second row, middle tube. You come down and get it when you want. All right? I'm gonna go now. You have a good night." Preston set the money inside the pipe and checked his other pockets for anything else he might have had on him. He came up with nothing. Something scraped inside the pipe, and Preston raised the light slowly to the edge, not wanting to shine it in the man's face if he'd come down the back of the stack. "Is that you, man?" When he didn't get an answer, he shined the light fully into the tube. The man scrambled towards him on all fours. Preston stumbled away. The disheveled man sprang from the tube, landing in a crouch and sitting back on his haunches. His long, matted hair hung wildly around his dirty, bearded face. Preston put a hand to his chest and tried to catch his breath. "Fuck!" He laughed nervously. "It's a good thing I don't got any shit left in me, man." The man cocked his head from side to side and sniffed at the air like a frightened dog, trying to assess the stranger in its yard. The man scratched at his beard. "If you're still around tomorrow, I'll Get you some food. Sound cool? Preston asked. The man reached behind him, drawing a stone hatchet from the small of his back. Preston patted the air. Hey, it's all good, he said, softly. I'm sorry if I scared you. I think we're about even on that one now, though. Tell you what, why wait till tomorrow? There's a McDonald's down the street. What do you say? You want to get a bite to eat? The man's dirty face stretched into a wide, toothy smile. Chapter 3. We all eat, and it would be a sad waste of opportunity to eat badly. Anna Thomas. It was pull day. What kind of loser is sad on fucking pull day? Troy ran his tongue over his teeth, clearing away undissolved granules of pre-workout. Despite the 400 milligrams of caffeine, 4 grams of beta-alanine, and the proprietary blend of who gives a shit that turned veins into garden hoses, Troy felt as energized as an Amish vibrator. Pull days were the best days. Back, buys, and traps. He should have been ecstatic. At the very least, he should have been hyped up enough to fake it. Instead, it felt like ants were building a hive under his skin, and he needed to piss for the 7th time since leaving his apartment. He didn't want to lift weights, not even T-bar rows. He wanted to text Talita and tell her it was a joke or a drunken mistake or whatever the hell he needed to say so that their shift that evening wouldn't be completely humiliating. I could drop a weight on myself, he thought. That would get me out of work for a couple of days. No, that's too short term. Maybe I can get stuck in the tanning bed. Why die like a man when you can die like a hot pocket? I wonder if she'll be at my funeral. I wonder if anyone will be. Probably just a meal to make sure it's true before he closes my membership. Troy walked around to the front of the gym, thinking of the best ways he could injure himself. He'd ran every scenario he could think of, trying to come up with a positive reason Talita hadn't responded to him. After that 45 seconds went by, he spent the rest of the day focusing on the horrible reasons she hadn't. What were the odds she hadn't noticed any of his flaws? She was probably just nice to him out of sympathy. He'd put in an application at his favorite pizza place just to be safe. He stopped at the front door and looked across the street at the park. It was all over social media. They'd found more body parts in the pond. He'd scrolled through some news on it. Apparently, there'd been a lot of missing pets reported throughout the county, too. And one article even mentioned similar crimes throughout the Appalachians over the past decade. The cops were refusing to say there was a crime at all, like a bunch of people just up and decided to start some DIY amputee club. There were only a few cars in the parking lot. No one wanted to play at the murder park, after all. A woman stood at the trunk of one of the vehicles, taking inventory on a backpack. Troy squinted at the familiar figure and sighed. That's a bad idea, lady, Troy said, recognizing her. Let the dog catcher find your mutt. He turned to enter the gym. The pre-workout wasn't the only thing nauseating him, and it wasn't the Talita situation either. Before protein intakes and progressive overloads, Troy had loved helping people. He wanted to make everyone's day better, and to be someone people could depend on. Traits his bitch ex-girlfriend had manipulated for her own means. Hell, if he was being honest, so had everyone else. His family, bosses, friends. Troy liked feeling useful so much that he'd spent years as everyone's doormat. Ashley had simply been the final straw. He hadn't done anything for anyone since then, and he hadn't realized how much he missed it until he saw the woman at the park. Troy shouldered his gym bag and jogged across the street to the park. Looking for a lost dog was a pretty damn good reason to miss work, too. The woman shut the trunk right as he caught up. She whipped around quickly at the sound of his plodding run. Troy waved, then rested his hands on his knees. He let his duffel slide off his arm to the asphalt. "Hey, hold up," he wheezed. "Give me a second, I need to catch my breath." "Yeah, well, I hope the breathing thing works out for you." The lady moved her hand to the pocket of her Crystal Lake hoodie. "But I got things to do." "Not alone," Troy managed to say. "You trying to get pepper sprayed? I saw you yesterday with the flyers." "So what?" "I want to help," he said, straightening up. "I've really got to start doing my cardio. Looks like there's probably a serial killer on the loose." "No shit, Knives Out. You piece that mystery together all on your own? Do you think you could let the oxygen get to my brain before you bust my balls? I'm trying to help." Troy waved a hand at the woods. "You shouldn't be out there looking for your dog by yourself." "My dog?" Her shoulders relaxed, and she snorted. "Thanks, Chad, or Hunter, or whatever. I'm not looking for a dog." "Then what was your flyer for?" "My husband," she snapped. "I was looking for my husband." "Well, you shouldn't be looking for him alone either," he shot back. "My name is Troy, by the way. Still a himbo name, Troy. I already found my husband, though." She nodded to the drained pond. "Parts of him, anyhow." "Jesus, fuck, I'm really sorry," Troy stammered. "That's fucked. Seriously. But what are you doing out here if you're not looking for him?" "I'm looking for his killer." The construction worker's terrace major had been cut into thick medallions that seared on the battered cast-iron skillet over the fire pit. His legs had been butchered into osso buco that marinated in a salvaged stock pot. It had been a good week for groceries. A pair of roasts he cut from the runner were smoking, low and slow, outside the shack. It was still too warm to keep much meat at hand, and the caves were a full day's hike, so Zachary had been sharing his kills. The bums at the camp never bothered asking where the barbecue came from, nor did they have any complaints about the quality. Zachary prided himself on that. Every animal had different grades of meat, and he'd learned to be choosy with his prey, no matter where he hunted. Runners were great for ribeye and filet mignon. Bodybuilders were best for short ribs and tartare during their bulking season, and carne asada later in their cut. Tennis players provided the best sirloins, and cyclists were perfect for stews and roasts. If you wanted a mouth-watering brisket, however, you needed to find yourself a laborer. Bricklayers were preferable over landscapers, but carpenters always have the best marbling. He carefully removed the steaks from the skillet. He'd let them sit for 10 minutes so the juices could redistribute through the tissue. Zachary had chosen to pair the steaks with roasted asparagus spears. He transferred those to the plate next to the petite fillet. He'd gathered 2 duck eggs from the park and had plenty of potatoes growing nearby. At breakfast, they'd be perfect accompaniments for the flank steaks he'd cut from the runner's abdomen. He was going to need a solid meal for the day's work. He'd been packing his favorite cuts into coolers he'd scrounged at the dump. With the police finding the inedible parts he'd tossed in the pond, it was time to move along. He needed a couple more kills first. That would get him through the winter. The caves interwoven beneath the county were as good as any appliance he'd seen before his awakening, and the meat would hold for months in the deepest of them. Zachary thought about his old life and wondered what grade he'd have given himself then. The coke, the CrossFit classes, the alcohol, the frivolous sexual encounters, and the stress. So much goddamn stress. He probably couldn't have even gotten decent burgers out of his former self. He'd been making 6 figures a year, 7 with a good bonus, when he had his mishap. He sampled the asparagus. It was crisp, with a nice zing from the lemon juice. After the asylum, he'd been released to a halfway house for continued monitoring. It was there he'd seen Queen for Fire. If they'd watched any other film, perhaps he wouldn't have ever woken up. Maybe he'd even have gotten better and picked up where he left off. He'd probably have blown his brains out or jumped from his office window by now. But the movie showed him the true meaning of life, and for almost 20 years, Zachary had lived harmoniously off what was provided for him, migrating and thriving in the natural way. He cut a morsel from the steak and chewed it thoughtfully. He'd forsaken the modern world to live as a savage, but one thing was certain: civilization had great taste. Cora had led the way along the paved trail that lapped the perimeter of Katy Park. The meathead had tagged along even after she told him her plan. She wasn't sure if he was an adrenaline junkie or just a dumbass, but she felt strangely comfortable around the walking lunk alarm. Cora rambled off a list of things she remembered from true crime documentaries and podcasts: drag marks, footprints, blood trails, litter, things that might give them a clue of where the killer had come from or gone to afterwards. Troy looked around dutifully. At first, Cora thought he was just playing along, hoping it would satisfy her curiosity so that she'd go home and he could go back to bench lifting or whatever it was called. She watched him crouch at the edge of the woodland trail that went to Joel's workplace. "What is it?" she asked. "The snow made this trail muddy as hell, so there's still good tracks," Troy said. "It goes to the geekdom, so there's not many sets. Those are definitely running shoes." "The geekdom?" "The kingdom of geeks," he explained. "That's what the bros call AMTI. The top 8 floors come over the trees and look down on the gym like a nerd castle. They sponsored the park's overhaul a few years ago. It's some kind of R&D company that makes..." "Oh shit! What is it?" "One of the things they make is prosthetics," he said excitedly. "There was a big article on it last year because they were looking for amputees to test this new robot leg they'd invented. What if one of the Poindexters is hacking people's limbs off so they have new guinea pigs?" Cora started to say something, but snorted instead. Something hit her gut like a soft punch. It happened again. and this time she chuckled. It seemed so inappropriate that it caught her off guard. She broke into laughter before she could stop herself. It felt great, and a moment later, that made her feel terrible. What is wrong with me? She asked herself. What kind of sick, crazy bitch would be laughing a day after her husband is murdered? It was just a theory, Troy winced. I mean, serial killers are geniuses. That broke her from her internal self-flagellation. She might have been deranged for letting herself have a moment of levity, but she knew her shit when it came to serial killers. She collected herself and shook her head. Actually, most of them are below average IQ, Cora said. They are clever or methodical, but not intelligent. What about Hannibal Lecter? That's like saying ducks can talk because of Daffy. Cora stared at him, incredulously. He's a fictional character, Troy. I knew that, Troy shrugged. There could be a smart one, though. Joel worked for ATMI. She patted him on the back, feeling bad for how quickly she'd crushed his theory. It would be a great paperback, but I doubt they're snatching people to make them into cyborgs. Either way, those tracks are from running shoes. If your husband worked there, then maybe he got grabbed between here and the office. Troy pointed down the path. There's a slope to the path that creates a blind spot. No one from the park would be able to see if they were passing by. Okay, Cora paused, suddenly surprised by the jock. That's some pretty detailed observations. Yeah, Troy looked at the ground and scuffed at it with his sneaker. My old man worked for Game and Fish. I spent summers with him after the divorce. We'd have to find missing hikers sometimes, or help tag animals for studies. I guess I still remember some of it. He's passed away? She asked, noting the melancholy in his voice. Something like that. The musclehead seemed much smaller after he said it. Cora waited to see if he would say anything else on the subject, but he started walking down the trail instead. He scanned the ground as he went, keeping his focus to the edges rather than the worn path. He sighed and turned. I had a lot of pre-workout and like a half gallon of water, he said. Thanks for sharing, I guess. Cora raised an eyebrow, then noticed the way he was moving his feet. Oh, right. I'll turn around. Thank you. Troy darted off the path and found a wide enough tree to dip behind. Cora noted that he made sure to angle himself so he could still see her without revealing himself. She appreciated the consideration, but wished he'd gone a little further as his stream noisily assaulted the brush around the tree, painting the image with Bob Ross clarity. He was apparently aware of how loud it was as well, and gave her an awkward, red-faced smile. Troy stared up at the trees and mouthed something. Cora looked away, feeling the urge to laugh yet again. She doubted he'd help her find Joel's killer, but she was glad he'd come along. Hey, you need to see this, he shouted. I am certain that I don't. Not this. Troy was pointing to the top of the tree. He tucked himself away and rounded the trunk. See? Right there. Cora followed his finger and nodded. Yep, I see those. They're really something. You don't see it, do you? Maybe if you told me what I was supposed to see. Look at that one. Troy turned her by her shoulders. Dude, You were just holding your dick, Cora groaned. And yes, it's another tree. They all look Wait. Those don't look the same. Exactly. Troy's frame seemed to re-enlarge to its former size. The one I peed on has a bunch of branches sawed off. But not just that. Look closely at the trunk. Cora gasped when she finally saw it. Thinner branches, tied together with twine, were laid between two thick ones, creating a triangular platform tight against the tree. While she was processing it, Troy grabbed the lowest branch and pulled himself up. His ascent was clumsy, but eventually he made it to the structure. Cora watched him step onto it, tentatively, even directly beneath the hide. And with Troy wearing brightly colored clothes, it was hard for her to see him. I can see the park, but just barely, he called down. And I can see the trailhead over there. But I can't see you. Cora walked backwards up the trail, keeping her eyes on Troy's position and watching him slowly disappear completely. Something he said earlier crept back into her mind. No one would ever know you're up there. I'm a $180. Troy swung down from the branches and dropped the last few feet with a curse. Someone lighter could stay up there for hours. Getting up and down would be a lot easier, too. I think I dislocated my scrotum dropping like that. Even easier if they were barefoot. Cora pointed at Troy's sneakers, then to the mud. This is getting way weird, Troy had to admit. He found what looked like Joel's path. The runner's gait was noticeable and consistent, until it wasn't. Cora saw it too. The stride turned into the zigzagging stumble of a drunken dancer, then stopped at a flattened, smeared patch. Troy followed the naked tracks over and knelt. The spots were hard to see among the displaced muck, but they were there, and Cora started to cry. That's blood, she whispered. That's his blood. We don't know that. Troy tried to reassure her. He pointed without looking up. But the barefoot guy took something that way. Cora scoured her eyes with her palms. The tracks led off the trail, through a patch of flattened grass. That's a drag mark, Troy said. The tracks are deeper at the ball, so he was pulling something pretty heavy. I think you should go back to the gym, Troy. Cora's voice was soft, but stern. I think we should both go to the cops, Troy protested. There's enough here to at least suggest there's a murderer out there. And what if he cleans it up before we get back? You said it yourself. They're stupid. Maybe he won't think about it. And if that's not the only hiding spot he's got, Cora pointed into the woods. He could be watching us right now. He could bolt before the cops finish sucking the donut glaze off their fingers long enough to type up the report. Shit, Troy mumbled. Okay, yeah, you're right. So we follow the tracks and see where they go. We see anything fucked up, though, and I'm throwing you over my shoulder and getting us the hell out of here. Agreed. Cora tapped her fingers nervously on her thighs. Something was gnawing at her, but she couldn't place it. Oh, she gulped, as it all became clear. That can't be it. But it is, isn't it? The deer stand, the drag marks, the feet and hands left behind. This isn't podcast bullshit. Jesus Christ, this shit doesn't happen. Not in real life. Hey, Troy snapped his fingers. What's eating you? About that. Remember what you said about Hannibal Lecter? Oh shit, Troy sighed. Chapter 4. One cannot think well, love well, sleep well, if one has not dined well. Virginia Woolf. They'd been following the killer's trail through the woods for a little over an hour. The terrain was rough and untraveled, so they lost the tracks a few times along the way. Troy got a jolt of excitement every time he picked the trail back up. It felt good to help Cora, even if there was a distinct possibility they would be murdered. Then they had crossed a rocky valley and lost the tracks completely. Troy worked diligently to locate the next set. Even though they'd just met, he didn't want to let Cora down. Her husband just died. No, fuck that. He was just eaten by a lunatic. Troy took a moment to watch Cora clamber onto a downed tree for a better view. She's out here like Rambo. Some kinds of strong aren't made in a gym. I didn't get a text back, and I'm a bad fucking Ben & Jerry's commercial. Weak sauce, bro. He hadn't thought about checking his phone since they linked up. When that finally occurred to him, he left the device in his pocket. Talita may have checked all the boxes for what he was looking for in a girlfriend, but that wasn't the same thing as actually being his girlfriend. Failure is good for you. You take the muscle to failure to get gains, he reminded himself. There's more than one way to get there, too. Talita is basically perfect, like a heavy set of skull crushers. They'll blow your tries up, but so will pushdowns. So will dips. Maybe I don't need skull crushers right now. Maybe I need some cable kickbacks. There's a trail for a reason, a voice shouted, breaking Troy out of his anabolic epiphany. Cora sputtered her lips. They'd been walking a circle for at least 30 minutes, trying to figure out which way the killer had gone. Troy glanced around, trying to spot the owner of the voice. The man bumbled through the foliage, swatting away at strands of spider silk in his path. "What are you two doing out here?" he asked. "Hiking," Cora said, pulling on her backpack straps for emphasis. "What are you doing out here?" "My job." The man stopped and indignantly put his hands on his hips. "Obviously." His khaki shirt was meticulously pressed and smooth, despite the buttons straining at their holes. Matching shorts dug into his chubby thighs, and compression socks stretched from his Walmart hikers to his knees. An embroidered patch on his sleeve and small gold-plated badge identified him as part of the city's park services, but not exactly which part. "We're saved!" Troy turned to Cora and winked. "I am so glad to see you, sir. I told her we needed a map, but you know how women are, especially the hot ones. Am I right?" "You bet your keister," the man said with a nervous laugh. He shot a finger gun at Cora. "Babes like her are always finding new ways to give me headaches, let me tell you. Making dicks hard and life harder since the garden." "I hear you, sir." Troy was sure he'd only ever seen a naked woman in HD. "You ain't got to call me sir. That's for regular folks, not a pair of alphas like us. Just call me Steve," he said, as he indicated Troy's outfit. "You trying to find the gym? I was headed there when I get off myself. Maybe I can give you some pointers. I'm benching 405 lately. Been trying to do more high rep work, you know. You doing about 4 plates? Yeah, for my warm-up sets, Troy thought. He sighed. You nailed it, Steve. I think I've hit a plateau. These last few months have been a real grind. Hell, I'm off at 5 and we can meet up, do a little hanging and banging. How's that sound, partner? That'd be awesome. Troy's years in retail were paying off. Say, my girl was told about some site out here. One of the chicks from her Zumba class said it's real remote and romantic, if you catch my drift. Right, Steve nodded. Friday is arm day, but studs like us always got time for hip thrusts. Am I right or am I right? You know it, bro, Troy said, ignoring the sound of Cora gagging behind him. Think you might know where this spot is at? Well, let's see. Steve pulled off his cap and smoothed his thinning hair. Someplace far from the park, but close enough to keep your energy up. I'd say you're looking for Javi's Mill. Used to be real popular back in the day, but not many people remember it now. That's gotta be it. It's still a hell of a hike, though. Good thing I skipped leg day. Again. On leg day, we train chest, Steve agreed. The men broke into a boisterous laughter over the age-old joke, while Cora watched on, helplessly. Troy slapped Steve on the shoulder. Steve squirmed a little. Troy had put a bit of sting on it because, charade or not, there are gym bro protocols to be maintained. Steve tensed his muscles one notch shy of shitting himself and laughed again. He gave them directions to the mill and reminded Troy about their gym date that evening before venturing back to his duties in the park proper. And they say bromance is dead, Cora groaned. We've lost Hannibal's trail, Troy reminded her. Steve's directions line up, though. A hunter doesn't stay where he hunts so that he doesn't spook the animals. He'd need a place close by, but out of the way. That sounds like this mill. You really think he's hiding out in some lover's lane? What if some couple stumbled in? Cannibal DoorDash, Troy shrugged. Like you said, these guys are clever, not smart. This is the best lead we've got. I say we head out, and if we don't see some clues along the way, we can try something else. Cora seemed to weigh the options that Troy didn't know they had. She nodded. Yeah, you're right. Let's go catch a killer. You didn't say anything about catching him. What, worried you might miss your date with Steve? Cora nudged him with her elbow. Maybe you can have a protein shake with 2 straws. Troy groaned. Fuck it. Let's go catch a killer. Remember growing up playing The Floor is Lava? Billy Lean asked, holding the phone out on the selfie stick. Well, that's the center of the grocery store. Everything here will kill you. It's not a question of if, but when. Billy was a self-proclaimed fitness guru and the face of Leanville. He'd gained over 20 million followers by walking around grocery stores and shouting about food additives. He skirted around an elderly couple and grabbed a can of asparagus. You see this? Canned veggies. Ha! More like cannot veggies, he told the camera. You've never seen a can growing out of the soil, have you? That right there tells you that this is bad for you. Check out these ingredients. Asparagus, water, and salt. It's a can of asparagus. Why isn't that the only ingredient? The answer is obvious, folks. Big Pharma. The water and salt are there to create an oxidizing reaction that draws out the heavy metals of the can. This is a can of cancer. That was the general gist of every single Leanville video, all 1,420 of them. Pick it up, skim the label, say something that sounds science-y, and repeat. The old couple grumbled their disapproval, and Billy framed his next shot to include them. "Case in point," Billy said in a low, conspiratorial tone. "These people are in their 50s, and just look at the state they're in. They look 70, and I'm going to show you why. Let's head over to the next aisle." He rounded the corner, passing up the pasta he normally shit-talked. With Halloween just around the corner, he'd be blasting carbs heavier than normal in the next few videos. He'd already shot some short clips that afternoon, lambasting Count Chocula and candy corn that he would edit into a bigger piece later. Billy picked up the box of Hamburger Helper and shook it loudly. He smirked, then tisked. Those two middle-aged geriatrics had 3 boxes of this stuff in their carts. Let's just ignore the carbs for a minute. You know, we all know, that the carbohydrate lie is just another weapon in the big pharma agenda. Carbs are the starting line in the race, and the finish line is diabetes, ADHD, and erectile dysfunction. I wish you could see this label. This 3-cheese pasta contains less than 2% cheese. So, what is the other 98%? Powdered milk, fake colors, seed oils, and soy. Boxed meal. More like boxed conspiracy. Effeminizing ingredients, carcinogens, heavy metals. They put silicone dioxide in it. That's plastic, for crying out loud. It should be made by Mattel. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stop filming in the store," Mike Walker said, coming down the other side of the aisle, with his bushy beard and tattooed ham-hock forearms. Mike looked like a biker more than he did an assistant manager. "You need consent from the customers and the staff." "You mean I need to pay the appropriate bribe and help spread your disinformation?" "I mean, if you don't get out of the store, I'm calling the cops." "Someone needs to. This whole store is a case of attempted murder." Billy rattled the box again and posed like a champion for his camera. "And that's not even getting into what you're doing to our kids and the blatant soy poisoning of our sons. You are complicit in the neutralization of the male gender." "This is my favorite flavor." Mike took the box of Hamburger Helper. The manager crossed his arms and drew back his broad shoulders with a grin. "I look womanly to you?" Billy's eyes zeroed in on the star-spangled tattoo that read, "Made at Fort Benning." He pulled the phone from the selfie stick with enough indignation to save face, but not enough to provoke Mike. He pointed the selfie stick at the manager and scoffed. "You're lucky I don't have time to waste on someone like you," the fitfluencer said with false bravado. "Enjoy your box of colon cancer." Billy stormed down the aisle and made a beeline for the front doors. He knew better than to film after dark. He tried to ignore laughter as Mike shouted a "Thank you for visiting Brown's Supermarket" behind him. Major retailers were quick to throw people like Billy Lean out of their stores, so influencers targeted places like Brown's instead. During the day, they might just get a stern talking to. Night shift wasn't just a different breed. It was a fucking Thunderdome. Even the prissy, aspartame-sweet cashier was filming his walk of shame and snickering. One of the stock boys threw a loaf of bread at him, square between the shoulder blades. "Watch out, Billy!" the pimple-faced teen shouted. "The carbs are coming to get you!" the bakery staff lobbed out-of-date muffins and rolls in his direction. The perpetually stoned produce associate batted himself with bags of edamame. "Help me, Billy! The soy! It's taking my manhood!" he cried. "Hey, eat my ass! It's all natural!" another employee shouted. As soon as he was outside, he snapped the phone back into the stick and took a moment to compose himself. He looked through the sliding glass doors and saw the elderly couple standing in the middle of the main aisle. Grandma chopped at her crotch in the international sign to suck it, while her husband went with the classic one-finger salute. Billy turned away, raising the phone to record on the way back to his brand-adorned Cybertruck. "As you can see, the grocery stores are 100% in on this," he said. "They are a mercenary army for the pharmaceutical drug cartels. After I stopped filming, I was physically assaulted for trying to educate you to the truth. Are you going to let places like this wage biological warfare on you and your family? If you're ready to fight back, just comment primal on this video. I'll DM you the 17 tenets our ancient ancestors followed thousands of years ago that I follow today." He shut the video off. Once it was posted, he'd make his wife send out the DMs. Maybe if she typed fast enough, she'd lose some fucking weight. Billy averaged 2,000 primal replies in the first 48 hours a new video was up. Almost all of them would shell out the 99 cents for his ebook. About half would order one of his vitamin bundles, and about a dozen would pay the $300 for a life consultation. He climbed into the truck, feeling some of the confidence coming back as he tapped on the McDonald's app. He made sure to set the delivery far enough in advance that he'd have his truck out of sight when Uber Eats arrived. He'd have his wife answer the door. Marrying a model had been a huge boost to his career early on. But 2 years after popping out his second fuck trophy, she'd be lucky to get a job with Lane Bryant. He couldn't look at her without wondering how much longer she was going to milk the whole childbearing thing before she got hot again. Billy added a 10-piece McNugget to his order. "Our ancestors would have fucking loved McDonald's," he said, as he debated between sweet and sour or barbecue sauce. He'd almost made up his mind when a fetid, warm breath drifted through his open window. He turned to see the wide, yellow-toothed smile of the ragged bum outside his truck. The homeless man scratched at his matted hair, paused, and then inspected something between his fingertips. "I don't have any change," Billy said. "Go bother someone else." The man didn't respond. He just sucked the captured louse from his fingers. "Gross, fucking freak! Get away!" The man laughed in a guttural, raspy way that reminded Billy of apes at the zoo. "Look, bulimic Post Malone, I'm going to call the cops if you don't get the hell out of here. I'm not telling you again." The bum took a step back and untied the rope that held his pants up. Billy watched in shock as the man freed himself from the tattered sweats. The hot steam spattered against Billy's door. "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" Billy screamed. "This is a Tesla, not your fucking shopping cart!" He waited until the man sheathed his pork sword before jumping out to confront him. His Crocs splashed in the piss puddle, drawing his eyes off the bum just long enough. The man jerked the rope free from his pants and wrapped it around Billy's neck, swinging him to the ground. The Fitfluencer's eyes bulged, his tongue darted out of his mouth, along with the breath he never got to finish inhaling. He felt the man's knee dig in between his shoulders. Blood vessels burst around the ligature. He clawed trenches into his flesh, trying to get his fingers under the rope. His face smashed into the damp asphalt, his nostrils filled with the scent of copper and ammonia as his own blood mixed with the man's urine. Billy's hyoid bone snapped, his trachea cinched shut completely, and his gagging turned into a gurgling wheeze. His vision went black, but he could still feel the rope pulling tighter. Then he felt something rough and cold dragging across his throat. Javi's mill had been the town's main source of income until the 1890s, when a copper vein had been discovered in the mountains. That dried up in the 40s, and by then the mill had become the premier spot for necking teenagers and adulterous spouses. The Virgo killer put a stop to those sorts of shenanigans in the summer of '63. During the 90s, a lustful nostalgia had brought it back into popularity, but the tech boom had created exponential growth in town. Motels, bars, and cybersex chat rooms soon replaced the need for secluded makeout destinations. Once again, the mill faded from memory, and for 30 years it had been left to nature. The stone foundations of the outlying buildings were overgrown with moss and sprouting weeds. The timber had rotted away half a century ago, leaving the rusted nails and hinges sprinkled about the grounds with other artifacts of the ancient past. While time had destroyed what once was, the mill was not without new construction. On the foundations of the main building, a shack had been pieced together from salvaged lumber, metal, and tarps. Wild vegetables grew among the tall grass, but others had been clearly cultivated in pots made of upcycled junk. Unidentifiable bones, stained with dried blood and shriveled remains of connective tissue, waved in the autumn breeze from a rack of branches. A coyote scratched at the ground below, foraging for bits of offal from whatever had been butchered there. Rocks from the creek had been painstakingly stacked into an L-shaped wall around the shack. Flavorful smoke rose from behind it, wafting over the hiding spot Cora and Troy had chosen for their stakeout. The coyote raised its head, sniffing the air. Even with the heavy scent of seasoned meats, it could pick out the floral notes of Cora's Gucci Bloom perfume. The animal darted back into the woods. "At least he won't be eating us," Cora said softly. They were supposed to be watching for the killer, but the entire time they'd been staked out, her focus had shifted back and forth between the smoke and the bones. She wondered if those bones had been her husband. "Is that who's cooking?" she asked herself, remembering Joel's scent. He always wore the same light, oceanic cologne, driftwood and oleander with citrus accords. It didn't seem possible that the savory, mesquite-infused smoke drifting over the wall could be Joel. "I'm losing it. He's cooking my husband, and I'm worried about how he's fucking seasoned." They'd been hiding on the mill's perimeter for 3 hours, and Troy still hadn't abandoned her. She glanced at the gym rat. He wasn't bodybuilder big, but he was getting there. Jacked, tanned, and vascular. Cora couldn't imagine any scenario where he didn't have better places to be than hiding in the woods, trying to catch a psycho with a complete stranger. The obvious explanation just didn't fit either. He was a full decade younger than her, for starters. Cora poked at the flesh of her thigh, pushing at the designer holes in her Levi's. She didn't know what his type was, but she was sure pudgy and pushing 40 wasn't on the list. If he wasn't thinking with his dick, then... "Why are you here?" The words were supposed to stay in her head. "You looked like you needed someone to be," Troy answered without hesitation. They exchanged awkward glances. Cora couldn't explain it, but she knew he was telling the truth. No presumptions or ulterior motives. He just wanted to help. She never would have thought that by looking at him before, and she felt a tinge of guilt because of it. "I guess that sounds kinda dumb," Troy said. "I didn't want to go to work, and I saw you, and... I don't know. It felt like you needed help. Whatever it was you were doing, it just didn't seem like you needed to be doing it alone." "Thank you," she whispered. "No problem." Troy took his phone out and checked the time. "My quads are sore as hell from all this crouching, and I need to pee again. I'm going to circle around and see if I can get a better look at the murder tent. Maybe I can pick up this asshole's tracks while I'm at it. Be careful." Careful is curling in the squat rack. Zachary lowered himself onto all fours and sniffed the roots of the tree. He licked the fluids collected in the grooves of the bark. The urine was salty and sweet and brought back a distant memory of popcorn. It hadn't been an animal that marked his territory. There were humans nearby. He crawled along, sniffing the ground. They'd left obvious tracks. One set belonged to a woman or child, and the other to a man. The female wore hiking boots and was encumbered. The male wore sneakers. The depressions were even. He was heavy, but it wasn't from a backpack. He was just a big motherfucker. That explained the smell, the excess protein of a bodybuilder. Zachary chuckled at his luck. The police had been all over the park since his little fuck-up. He knew to take the shoes off before tossing the feet in, but he'd been in a hurry and got careless. Zachary dragged the dead man into the brush to retrieve later. If he hurried, he could catch up with the interlopers and come back for him later. If he worked through the night, he could have all three butchered by dawn and make his way to the caves before anyone could find him. There'd be enough meat for the winter, and he could preserve some for the long hike west. Zachary was growing older. He'd lived well since his awakening, but he had lived without purpose. It was time for that to change. In the spring, he would make his way to the Rockies. There was plenty of game in those mountains, and he could easily move, unnoticed, all the way into Canada, then through Alaska. He would travel the path of his Paleolithic ancestors, back to the cradle of life. Chapter 5. The only time to eat diet food is while you're waiting for the steak to cool. Julia Child. Troy's stomach rumbled as he crept through the grass. He was thankful Cora was so far away. Intellectually, he knew the cooking meat was most likely her husband, or some other poor bastard. That didn't change the fact that it smelled amazing. Got me out here chasing the Guy Fieri of cannibalism. I bet I'd be a badass burger. He pinched at his belly. 2 patties of 85% lean ground bro with melty slices of reduced-fat cheddar, donkey sauce, and fried onions on a brioche bun. The Gaines's Maximus, now at Flavortown, USA. The text alert made him jump hard enough that he nearly came all the way to his feet. He flopped backwards. His Fitbit lit up, telling him he was in the peak zone and to keep going. Troy slapped a hand to his chest, taking in heaving breaths. He felt stupid for not silencing the damn thing when he'd called into work a couple of hours earlier. Even if this was his first stakeout, he should have known better. He wrestled it out of his nylon pants, but before he could flip it to silent, he saw the alert. It was Talita. Troy opened the message and laughed. She'd dropped her phone in the bathtub when he had texted her. She had wanted to explain in person, but he wasn't at work. More importantly, she'd apologized. That was something his ex had never done, not even when he caught her getting spit-roasted by the maintenance men in their apartment. He laid his head back in the grass. Talita really was amazing, if only by comparison to his past mistakes. He typed a quick reply that he was helping a friend with a personal problem. Talita responded almost immediately, filling the dead-still forest with the echoes of the notification. Shit! He silenced the phone this time before answering. Talita let him know the crew had clowned on that internet loser Billy Lean, and he had missed it, but she'd show him the video later. The bubbles warbled on the screen to let him know she was typing again. I would really like to see you, the next message said. I have the same feelings. That sealed it. As soon as he was done kicking the shit out of Chef Dahmer, Troy was going straight to the store. He rose to his knees and looked over the grass. Several unlit lanterns told him no one had returned to the shack as of yet. Something whistled, sending a chill up Troy's spine. It wasn't a person or a bird. Something about it was unnatural and ominous. But he couldn't quite figure out why, until the spear passed through his abdomen. Zachary loaded another thin shaft into the atlatl and let it fly. He generally used the weapon for small, nimble game. The points weren't big enough to cause significant blood loss. Taking the muscle-bound youth from a distance seemed the only safe route, however. His target wasn't much more than a man-shaped silhouette, but Zachary had become highly proficient with his weapon. He took his second shot, and the weightlifter went down. The buck would be good eating, but he wasn't sure what to do about the doe. He knelt beside the unconscious woman and swept her hair away from her face. Women could have been a different species. Their flesh was softer, with a consistency that made him think of pears. The marbling was evenly distributed in females, making every bite explode with flavor. A steak cut from this one would have cost him a mint in the restaurants he had frequented before his awakening. Then again, there were other things to consider. Zachary inspected the wound where he'd clubbed her. It wasn't too bad. He could treat it so it wouldn't get infected. He pinched the back of her arm, then her side. He raised the baggy hoodie and ran his filthy fingers across her stomach. She wasn't particularly athletic, but she wasn't fat either. He moved one hand to squeeze her hip and let the other crawl under her shirt, digging past the lace and underwire of her bra to the flesh inside. It was firm, but delicate. Zachary made up his mind. It was time to expand the tribe. Cora awoke to the smell of pulled pork and the taste of blood. The rough braid of the rope grated the flesh of her wrists. She bit on the knots of her gag until her jaw hurt, but it was tied too tight to wrestle it free. A plate of roasted vegetables and cooked meats steamed on the stone floor, a foot away from her. She took in her surroundings quickly. She was laying in the corner of the L-shaped wall outside the killer's shack. The primitive rack she'd seen earlier no longer held bare bones. In their place, a man's naked body hung by its ankles. Gravity drained the last drops of blood through the gash in his throat, but she was sure he'd been dead for a while. Through the fog of concussion, she remembered something about lividity and time of death. The victim would need to be butchered quickly. That meant she had longer to live and to find a way to escape. Maybe she wouldn't have to at all. Troy could have called the police. Meathead definitely has his phone on him, she thought. His text notifications going off were the last thing she remembered before her skull got bashed in. Perhaps he heard the club cracking off her head and dialed 911. Or maybe the killer heard the phone first and killed him. Please don't be dead, you lunk. I don't need another funeral to go to. She stared at the slices of rare meat oozing on the dingy platter. That's not Troy. That's not Joel. It's just a raccoon or a dog. Shit. Please don't be a dog either. The killer returned to his latest victim. Cora did her best not to scream. The gag would have made it pointless anyhow. The cannibal's hair was long and clumped with dirt and appeared interwoven with the unkempt beard. He wore threadbare sweatpants and a tunic made from animal furs with no shoes. He reminded her of Neanderthal, both in attire and the way he moved. He rolled a beat-up igloo into a row of similar coolers. The caveman drew a stone-bladed knife from his hip and started toward the body. He paused suddenly, turning his head up to one side. He used the blade to drag the hair away from his ear, then turned to face Cora. The man approached her in a strange, quadrupedal manner. His approach was slow and cautious. He sniffed the air as he drew nearer. He gnashed his teeth, grumbling and growling and letting out the odd syllables of a man learning to speak. Or, more accurately, learning to speak again. He sheathed the knife when he came to her side and helped her sit up against the wall. Something clattered beside her, but Cora didn't dare look away from the cannibal to see what it was. He cupped his hands on her face and pried the gag from between her jaws. "What do you want from me?" She felt stupid asking a cannibal what he wanted. She should have just asked if he wanted fries with that, but she felt like she needed to say something. He smiled widely at her. When she didn't return the gesture, he forced his grimy thumbs into her mouth and stretched her cheeks away from her teeth. He removed his fingers, and she scowled at him. The man barked. He squeezed her breasts roughly and then pressed her face back into a smile. He smiled back, nodding vigorously to let her know that that was the correct response. Cora snapped her teeth at him, taking a chunk out of his thumb. He crawled away on his haunches and sucked the wounded digit. Cora squirmed, bringing her knees to her chest. Her fingers brushed something on the floor, and she was suddenly aware of how light her pocket felt. She let her fingers crawl over the item, exploring the hard plastic shell, all the way to the metal ring attached to one end. She dragged it into her palm. The would-be caveman jumped his feet under him, so he perched menacingly across from her. He pointed at Cora, then to the floor, with an animalistic grunt. He stood and repeated the motions. Cora stared at him blankly. He jerked his sweatpants down to his thighs. His half hard-on was just as emaciated and filthy as the rest of him. He pointed to the floor again and growled. Cora growled back at him. "Come and make me, you fake-ass Fred Flintstone!" She tightened her grip on the object. "Or is your club too soft to do the job?" The man grabbed her by the arm and rolled her onto her face, then lifted her hips into the air. Cora let him position her how he wanted. As soon as she felt his fingers hook into her waistband, she knew she was on the mark. Cora mashed her thumb on the pepper spray's button. The caveman's hands clenched into fists, and he howled as the pressurized stream soaked his genitals. Cora held the trigger down. His cries turned shrill until they were nothing but strangled attempts to breathe as drops found their way inside the tip. At almost 2 million Scoville heat units, the spray felt like napalm traveling up his urethra. Cora rolled onto her back. The man frantically battered his own crotch in a vain attempt to stop the burning. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his blistered flesh with one hand and drawing his knife with the other. He sprang at her, but she rolled away and let him crash into the wall. Cora screamed as powerful hands seized her arms and jerked her to her feet. She visualized an entire clan of primitive hunters dragging her back to their cave. "I told you it was too dangerous to be out here by yourself," Troy said, spinning her around to face him. "I called the cops, too." Cora smiled at him, but then her eyes went wide, and the expression melted into pure shock. The shaft of a broken spear protruded from his abdomen, and a large gash leaked down his side, where he had hastily torn out a second. Before she could say anything, Troy jerked her to the side. The caveman charged at them with knife cocked over his head. Troy met him halfway, driving a shoulder into the man's chest and bulldozing him through the precariously stacked stones. They both groaned and rolled in the rubble. Troy probed at the belly wound and found the spear had sunk in deeper. He grabbed the man by the arm and cranked it behind his back. "Today," he took a deep breath and steadied himself. "Today is my favorite day." The Neo-Neanderthal squirmed and fought to get free until Troy captured his other arm. He put his foot between the cannibal's shoulders and tightened his grip on his wiry appendages. "Do you know what today is?" Troy asked. "It's pull day, motherfucker!" Troy stomped down and jerked back at the same time. The killer's arms dislocated with wet, sharp pops that seemed to echo forever in the desolate ruins of Javi's mill. Troy dropped him, face first on the rocks, and retrieved the knife. He went to Cora, cutting the ropes from her wrists. "Jesus, "You're hurt really bad, Himbo," she said. "We need to get you to a hospital." "That sounds like a great idea. I can't ever thank you for everything." Cora tried to brace his weight as much as she could. "You saved me. You caught the man that murdered my husband. You got stabbed for me." "Twice. I got stabbed twice," he corrected her. "Can we stop by my job? There's this great chick there named Talita, and I need you to tell her all that, especially the part about me saving your life." "How about I drop you off at the hospital, and then I go tell her?" "That's pretty smart," Troy agreed. "That's why I lift weights, though. Thinking is for nerds." Epilogue. If it tastes good, spit it out. Vince Garanda. Zachary turned the bacon on the industrial griddle. There hadn't been a trial. Given his previous incident in New York and the circumstances of the crimes, he'd been remanded to a maximum security psychiatric hospital until a time when he was mentally fit to stand trial for the murders he'd committed. He'd behaved well since day one and even started to speak a little. He wore his uniform like all the patients, but still had an aversion to shoes, preferring the feel of the tiles on his bare soles. The doctors felt that was a small concession to make for his treatment. He'd been taking his regimen of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers without fail, and his only complaint had been the quality of the cooking. After 18 months as a model patient, the administrators had decided to reward him by letting him work in the kitchen 3 days a week. There had been some pushback about letting a cannibal do the cooking, but the other patients had responded positively to the change as well. They all looked forward to his days on breakfast duty. "Yo, Z," Snyder Ambrose, or one of his personalities, said. "They finally stopped being cheap and let you cook with the good stuff. This shit is gourmet as fuck." "No kidding," Sammy Wilson agreed. "Think I can get some more of that bacon?" Zachary nodded happily and scooped the sizzling slices onto a fresh plate, straight from the griddle. He passed it over the counter and gestured for them to share. He smiled as they bit into their pieces. The bacon was crisp, and the spices he'd used were right on the mark. The men's satisfied groans told him that they agreed. They thanked him for the second helping and meandered to their table. Zachary always prided himself on his ability to pick the best meats, no matter where he went. The Carter Institute for the Criminally Insane was no exception. He took the butcher knife from the magnetic strip and went to the cooler. Doug McGuire waited in the corner. The pedophile stared blankly at him. His mouth hung open in mid-sentence, with a strand of drool running from his bottom lip to his hairy nipple. Zachary knelt next to him and cut another section of pork belly from the man's abdomen. The CC, as the patients called the institute, had a diverse assortment of livestock for him to choose from. With his beady eyes and pudgy face, McGuire had been an obvious pick to harvest for bacon, but Zachary wanted to keep his menu fresh. He was thinking steak and eggs on Thursday. Zachary already knew who he'd be serving. You can't just slap any cut of meat down on a plate. After all, you gotta watch that dietary cholesterol. It's a real killer. For proper steak and eggs, you needed good sirloins, Dr. Wooten's office was full of tennis trophies. He'd taste magnificent. Despite the plentiful game awaiting his abattoir, there was something else to consider. Walking amongst the prey were others like him, ones that needed to awaken and take their place in nature with him. The appetite grows by what it feeds on. It seemed apropos that he was on the breakfast detail. Soon, his cooking would wake up the entire tribe. And that, my spookies, is the end of tonight's grisly meal. I hope you've still got your appetite, though, because tomorrow the menu takes a truly bloody turn. We're headed back to Strickfield, Ohio, where the infamous Countess Elizabeth Bathory herself is celebrating Halloween in a way only she can, with a bath in fresh blood and a showdown that drips with horror. So, get some rest and maybe skip the skincare routine, because you'll want to join me tomorrow for Halloween Blood Hunt, because the most dangerous thing in Strickfield this October might just be eternal youth. So make sure you're subscribed, because every single day of October, we've got something scary for you to enjoy. And if you want to give us your support, we really do appreciate it by heading to weeklyspooky.com/join. For as little as $1 a month, you get 2 bonus episodes every month, over 5 years of creepypasta readings, and exclusive audiobooks. And I also want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Kate and Lulu, Jessica Fuller, Mike Eschewey, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much, and if you want to hear your name at the end of every episode of Weekly Spooky in my silky, scary voice, head to weeklyspooky.com/join and select a tier at the $15 a month or higher. It really helps us keep going and going as we wrap up our 6th year of Weekly Spooky. But now it's time for me to get back to work. There's so much more to record for myself, for my executive producers, Bobbletopia.com, and Rob Shields, for my producer, Dan Wilder, and of course, our composer, Ray Mattis. I'll be talking at you tomorrow when I see you in Strickfield.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me. Ha 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 ha!